Drax's log. The stars never looked so cold. As I stared out from the bridge of my command ship, Indomitable, the infinite void seemed different today, hostile, as though it knew something was coming. The Thalorian Empire had conquered worlds, bent entire species to our will, and yet there was something out there that even the Emperor feared. And for the first time in my life, I felt the gnawing touch of fear too. It was the humans. They weren't like any of the others, the scurrying insectoids, the pacifist gas dwellers, or even the enigmatic Dothrax who could warp space with a flick of their wings. No, the humans were special. They were unpredictable. I had always thought of them as primitives, an experiment in chaos with no regard for the cosmic order. But after what I witnessed on Thalorian 3, everything changed. They had evolved, ascended into something far beyond my understanding. I had seen it with my own eyes. One of them, hovering in the air like a god, with eyes burning brighter than any star, ripping apart a battlecruiser with nothing but a gesture. It wasn't technology. It wasn't magic. It was power, the kind that transcends everything we Thalorians had built over millennia. They had become godlike beings, able to twist the very fabric of reality to their will. That's why I'm here now, floating in the cold vacuum of space, waiting for orders. The Emperor thinks we can wipe them out. He thinks that sheer firepower can destroy what we don't understand. But I know better. I saw it. No weapon we have will be enough. Yet, the orders remain clear: exterminate all human colonies before their power spreads any further. Commander Drax, came a voice from behind me, breaking my trance. I turned, finding myself face to face with my second-in-command, Lieutenant Tarkus. He was a loyal officer, efficient and predictable, everything I wasn't. His eyes betrayed nothing but duty. "What is it, Tarkus?" "We've received new orders from the Emperor. We are to proceed immediately to the Arcturus system. Intelligence suggests that a significant human presence has been detected there. The Ascendants may be using it as a staging ground." The Arcturus system. Another peaceful planet about to be turned into a war zone. But it wasn't the war that bothered me. It was that we were fighting something we didn't understand. Something that was once human, now so much more. "Prepare the fleet. We leave at once," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my mind raced. Tarkus saluted and left the bridge. I returned my gaze to the stars. What was it about the humans? They had once been like us, ambitious, curious, mortal. Now they were something different, something terrifying. I had heard rumors that it wasn't natural, that humanity's transformation had been triggered by some ancient technology buried deep within Earth's atmosphere. Others whispered of a secret Thalorian experiment, long forgotten, that had gone horribly wrong. The truth, however, remained elusive. I had to know. 2 standard cycles later, we arrived in the Arcturus system. The planet hung in space, serene and unsuspecting. From orbit, it looked no different from any other human colony, a blue-green world dotted with sprawling cities and endless oceans. But there was something about it. Something wrong. "Sir, we've detected an energy anomaly on the planet's surface," Tarkus said, his voice taut with tension. "It matches the readings we picked up on Thalorian 3. The same readings. The ones that preceded the annihilation of an entire fleet. Prepare for planetary assault," I ordered. "Deploy ground forces immediately. I want eyes on the ground." The fleet moved into position, deploying drop pods that hurtled toward the planet's surface. My own squad was preparing to land as well. Despite my rank, I preferred to lead from the front. Tarkus had always questioned my judgment on that, but I wasn't about to let my men die without me. As our pod descended, the surface of the planet came into view. What I expected was a typical human city, steel spires reaching toward the heavens, interlaced with the clutter of a society always on the verge of chaos. But what I saw was far from typical. The city was abandoned. No movement, no signs of life, just ruins. "This doesn't feel right," Tarkus muttered beside me. He was right. The human colonies were never empty, not like this. We had expected a fight, but instead we found silence, and that was the worst part of it. The pod hit the surface with a heavy thud, and the hatch hissed open. We stepped out into the eerie stillness. The air was thick, not with pollution, but with energy. I could feel it in my bones, a hum that set my nerves on edge. "Fan out," I ordered my men. "Tarkus, take the east sector. I'll lead the sweep of the city center." As we moved deeper into the city, the hum grew louder, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the air. It wasn't long before we found them. Or rather, they found us. It started with a ripple in the air, like heat rising off the ground. Then, out of nothingness, they appeared, 3 figures, standing in the middle of the ruined city square. At first glance, they looked human, but as they stepped forward, I realized they were anything but. The one in the lead, tall and clad in a shimmering, almost ethereal cloak, raised a hand. The ground beneath us trembled, and in an instant, every weapon we had was ripped from our hands, hovering in mid-air before crumpling like paper. My men gasped in shock. Tarkus swore under his breath. I stood frozen, staring at the figure before me. This was one of them, an Ascendant. And then he spoke. "You came to destroy us," the Ascendant said, his voice calm, almost amused. "But you don't understand what we've become, what we are." His eyes glowed with a strange light, like distant stars flickering in the void. I had seen that light before, on Zenther Roman 3. The memory of that day flashed through my mind, the destruction, the power, the helplessness. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The Ascendant smiled, a cold, unsettling smile. "We were once like you, but we've evolved, transcended. Your empire's arrogance will be its undoing." And then, before I could react, everything changed. The world around me shifted, twisted, and in a blink, I found myself somewhere else, no longer on Arcturus, but standing on a barren, alien landscape beneath a blood-red sky. My men were gone. The Ascendant stood before me, still smiling. "Welcome to the end, Commander Drax." I was standing on an alien world, and yet I hadn't moved. The realization hit me hard. This was no mere teleportation or hologram. It was something far worse. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, but there was an oddness to it, like the air had been thinned out and the sky pushed further away. The Ascendant, standing mere feet away, had done this warped reality around me as if it were no more difficult than drawing breath. "What have you done?" I demanded, my voice ragged with fear and fury. The Ascendant tilted his head, examining me as one might a curious insect. "What we've always been able to do," he said, his voice soft, almost patient. "You've just never seen it. Not like this." The blood-red sky pulsed, veins of light flickering across it as though the heavens themselves were alive. The ground, once still, began to tremble in a way that seemed far too deliberate, far too controlled. This was no natural world. This was a construct, a manifestation of the Ascendant's will. "Is this some kind of illusion?" I asked, my voice low and harsh, though even as I spoke, I knew the answer. He smiled, a cold, almost condescending smile. "Illusion? No. This is a small piece of reality, bent to my will. Something your people have no grasp of. Yet." I blinked, struggling to hold on to my thoughts. I was a Thalorian commander, an agent of the Emperor, and yet here I was, completely at the mercy of a being that had once been a mere human. The rage that built within me wasn't just from fear, it was from the audacity of it all. We, the Thalorians, the rulers of the galaxy, had been bested, and worse, by a species we had once considered inferior. "I don't understand," I said, swallowing my pride for the moment. "How did you evolve? What made you like this?" The Ascendant stepped closer, his expression shifting to something more thoughtful. "That's the question, isn't it? The question your empire never stopped to consider. Instead, you sent ships, weapons, soldiers, and all of them died." He gestured with a hand, and in the distance, the shape of a battlecruiser materialized above the horizon, its bulk looming menacingly. But the ship was twisted, mangled, as though it had been caught in some unseen force. "You thought you could destroy what you didn't understand, but we were always more than you knew." I clenched my fists. "If you're so powerful, why haven't you destroyed us? Why not crush the Empire and be done with it? His eyes glinted. Because destruction isn't the answer. Not yet. There's still a chance for something greater. What do you mean? The Ascendant took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. You think this is about war, about conquest, but it's not. It's about evolution, about pushing the limits of existence. We've reached beyond what your Emperor can comprehend. But you, Commander Drax, you're different. I see it in your eyes. The doubt, the questions. The wind shifted, the sky darkening further, as if the planet itself responded to his moods. You fear us, and yet you want to understand. I was silent. He wasn't wrong. Despite the terror, despite the overwhelming power he displayed, there was a part of me that wanted to know, needed to understand what had happened to humanity. How had they gone from a fractured, fragile race to something that could bend reality to their will? You keep talking about evolution, I said carefully, but no species evolves this fast, not without help. The Ascendant's smile returned, but this time it was colder, more calculated. You're more perceptive than most of your kind. You're right. Humanity's evolution wasn't natural, not entirely. There it was, the confirmation I had been dreading. The rumors about ancient Thalorian experiments, about forgotten technologies, were true. What did we do? I asked, the weight of the question settling in my chest. You didn't do anything, Commander. Not you personally, but your empire. It meddled where it shouldn't have. Centuries ago, long before your Emperor rose to power, Thalorian scientists discovered something deep within Earth's atmosphere. Something old, something powerful. They tried to harness it, to control it, but they didn't understand what they were dealing with. I stared at him, the pieces beginning to fall into place. And that's what changed you. He nodded. The atmosphere was altered, subtly at first, but over time, it accelerated our evolution. It didn't give us these abilities, it unlocked them. Abilities we didn't even know we had. I felt my stomach drop. You're saying you were always capable of this? In a way, yes. The Thalorian interference simply sped up the process. We became more than human. We became ascendant. I took a step back, my mind racing. If what he was saying was true, then the Thalorian Empire had unwittingly created the very beings that now threatened its existence. It was our fault. We had unleashed gods upon the galaxy. You realize, I said slowly, the Empire will never allow you to exist. Not now. The Ascendant's eyes darkened. We know. That's why we're preparing. The Emperor will come for us, and when he does, we'll be ready. And what about the rest of the galaxy? I asked. Do you expect them to just bow down to you? He shook his head. No, we don't want to rule, Commander. That's the mistake your empire made. We don't seek power over others. We seek only to protect ourselves, to ensure our survival. I frowned. You expect me to believe that? After everything you've shown me? The Ascendant stepped closer, his gaze piercing. You've seen what we can do, but you haven't seen the full extent of it. Not yet. And then, without warning, the world shifted again. The blood-red sky, the barren landscape, it all dissolved, replaced by something far more familiar. I was back on the bridge of the Indomitable, surrounded by my crew, the cold steel of the command deck beneath my feet. I blinked, disoriented, as the familiar hum of the ship's systems returned to my ears. It was as though nothing had happened, but I knew better. Commander Drax, Tarkus's voice cut through the haze, pulling me back to reality. Are you all right? I turned to face him, my mind still reeling from what I had just experienced. How long had I been gone? Minutes? Hours? Days? I couldn't tell. But one thing was clear, everything had changed. I'm fine, I said, though the words felt hollow. Tarkus frowned, clearly unconvinced. We lost contact with you for several minutes. The drop pod was empty when we arrived on the surface. Forget the drop pod, I said, shaking my head. We need to get out of here, now. Out of here? Tarkus repeated, confused. But we've just arrived. I said now, I snapped, my voice sharper than intended. Get the fleet moving. We're leaving the Arcturus system. Tarkus hesitated, clearly unsure what to make of my sudden change in demeanor. But he didn't argue. Yes, Commander, he said, turning to relay my orders to the rest of the crew. I stared out at the stars beyond the viewport, my mind racing. The Ascendants were real, and they were more powerful than I had ever imagined. The Thalorian Empire had no idea what it was up against. As the fleet began to pull away from the planet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The Ascendants' words echoed in my mind. We became more than human. What had we done? What had the Empire unleashed upon the galaxy? Back on the capital world of Thalos Prime, the Emperor's palace was a fortress of opulence and power, its black spires piercing the clouds, a symbol of the Empire's dominance over the galaxy. Inside, the Emperor himself sat on a throne of obsidian, his eyes cold and calculating as he listened to the latest reports from the front lines. The room was filled with advisors, generals, and diplomats, all of them waiting for the Emperor's judgment. But the Emperor said nothing, his gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. A map of the galaxy hung in the air, its borders marked by the Empire's ever-expanding reach. But there was one region, one sector, that remained troubling: the Terran expanse, the humans. They are becoming a problem, one of the advisors said, breaking the silence. The Emperor's eyes flicked to the advisor, his expression unreadable. A problem? He repeated, his voice low and dangerous. The advisor swallowed nervously. Yes, Your Excellency. The reports from Zenther Roman III and Arcturus suggest that the humans have evolved in ways we didn't anticipate. They've developed powers that— Powers? The Emperor interrupted, his tone icy. Are you suggesting that these primitives pose a threat to the Empire? The advisor hesitated, clearly aware of the peril he was in. Not to the Empire itself, Your Excellency, but they've demonstrated abilities that could disrupt our operations in the surrounding sectors. Their evolution is unprecedented. We don't fully understand the extent of their capabilities yet. The Emperor rose slowly from his throne, his long, dark cloak billowing behind him as he descended the steps toward the advisor. His footsteps echoed in the grand hall, each one heavier than the last. You don't understand, he repeated softly, the calmness in his voice far more terrifying than any display of anger. You've had centuries to understand this species, and yet you still bring me this uncertainty. The advisor trembled, taking an instinctive step back. We believe their technological and biological evolution had reached a peak, Your Excellency. But this, it's something beyond that, something we couldn't have predicted. The Emperor stopped in front of the advisor, towering over him like a shadow. The Empire does not tolerate failures of prediction, and yet, here you stand, telling me that these humans have somehow surpassed us. The advisor fell to his knees, bowing his head. Forgive me, Your Excellency, I meant no disrespect. But the reports from our commanders suggest that these humans, these Ascendants, are no longer bound by the same rules of existence as we are. Silence followed the advisor's words. For a long moment, the Emperor merely stood there, his expression unreadable, his eyes distant as if contemplating something far beyond the walls of his palace. Finally, he spoke, his voice as cold as the void. Prepare the fleet. The advisor's head snapped up, eyes wide in disbelief. Your Excellency. The Emperor turned away, walking back toward his throne. If the humans have evolved beyond our understanding, then we will remind them of their place in the galaxy. I will lead the assault myself. We will burn their worlds until nothing remains. But if they truly have these powers, perhaps direct confrontation. Enough. The Emperor's voice thundered through the hall, silencing any further protest. The Empire does not fear primitives with delusions of grandeur. We will show them what true power is. The advisor bowed his head again, his voice barely a whisper. As you command, Your Excellency. As the advisor hurried from the room, the Emperor returned to his throne, his mind already racing ahead. The Terran Expanse was a distant region, isolated from the core worlds of the Empire, but it had become a festering wound. The humans, once seen as nothing more than a minor nuisance, had transformed into something far more dangerous. The Emperor knew that this would not be a simple war, it would be an extermination. The fleet sailed silently through the cold reaches of space, the stars a distant blur as the Indomitable and its escort ships left the Arcturus system behind. The tension on the bridge was palpable, the crew on edge, still processing the events on the surface below. I stood at the central command station, staring out at the endless void. My mind was still struggling to comprehend what I had seen, what I had experienced. The Ascendants were far more than just humans with advanced technology. They were something else entirely, something beyond. Commander Drax. Tarkus approached me, his voice quiet but urgent. "We've received a transmission from High Command." I turned to face him, already anticipating the message. "What does the Emperor want?" "He's mobilizing the fleet," Tarkus said, his face grim. "The Emperor himself is leading an assault on the Terran Expanse." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "He's what?" Tarkus nodded. "They're calling it a final extermination. The Empire has decided the humans are too dangerous to be allowed to exist." I turned away, my thoughts racing. The Emperor didn't know what he was dealing with. He couldn't. If he truly understood the power the Ascendants wielded, he would never dare to provoke them like this. "They don't stand a chance," I muttered, more to myself than to Tarkus. Tarkus frowned. "Sir?" I shook my head, trying to push the doubt aside. "The humans, the Ascendants, they're not like us, Tarkus. They've evolved in ways we can't even begin to understand. Sending the fleet against them, it's suicide." Tarkus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with my words. "The Emperor believes they can be defeated." "The Emperor doesn't know what I know," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "He hasn't seen what they're capable of." "Then perhaps we should tell him," Tarkus suggested, his tone cautious. I snorted, shaking my head. "You really think the Emperor is going to listen to a field commander's warnings, especially when he's already made up his mind? No. This war is coming, whether we like it or not." Tarkus said nothing, but the worry in his eyes was clear. He knew as well as I did that the Empire had made a grave mistake, but there was nothing we could do to stop it. The Ascendants were coming, and they were going to tear the galaxy apart. The Council of Ascendants gathered in the heart of the Nexus, a towering structure of shimmering glass and metal that stretched high into the sky. Each member of the Council was a being of immense power, their forms still recognizably human, but now more ethereal, more divine. At the center of the Council stood Valen, the Ascendant who had met with me on the surface of Arcturus Roman III. His eyes glowed with a cold, inner light as he addressed the others. "The Empire has made its move," he said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The Emperor himself is leading the assault." A murmur spread through the Council, but there was no fear, only grim determination. "They don't understand," one of the Ascendants said, her voice calm but resolute. "They still think we're the same as them, that we can be defeated with brute force." Valen nodded. "And that's their greatest mistake. They don't realize that we've already surpassed them." Another Ascendant, a tall figure with jet black hair and eyes like molten gold, stepped forward. "Shall we meet them in battle? Crush them before they can even reach the Expanse?" Valen shook his head. "No. We will not stoop to their level. They seek to destroy us because they fear what they don't understand. But we are not conquerors. We are not tyrants. We are more." The Council fell silent, each member contemplating Valen's words. "What are you suggesting, Valen?" the black-haired Ascendant asked. Valen's eyes darkened, his expression hardening. "The Emperor believes he can wipe us out with force, but we will show him that his weapons are useless against us. We will bend reality itself to our will, and when he realizes that he cannot win, we will offer him a choice." "A choice?" the black-haired Ascendant echoed, his tone skeptical. Valen smiled, a cold, calculating smile. Yes, surrender, or be erased from existence. The council murmured in agreement. The Ascendants had no desire for conquest, no thirst for blood, but they would defend themselves with all the power at their disposal. The Emperor will come, Valen continued, his voice low and dangerous. But he will not leave, not unless he understands the new order of things. We are no longer bound by the same rules that govern the rest of the galaxy. We are beyond. He raised his hand, and the air around him seemed to ripple and warp, as though reality itself bent to his will. The Ascendants will not be destroyed, Valen said, his voice carrying an undeniable finality. We will reshape the galaxy, and the Thalorian Empire will either accept this, or it will cease to exist. The Emperor stood at the viewport of his flagship, watching as his vast fleet assembled in formation around him. Hundreds of warships, battlecruisers, and dreadnoughts, all prepared to carry out his will. This was the might of the Thalorian Empire, and soon it would be unleashed upon the Terran expanse. "My lord," one of his generals said, approaching cautiously. "The fleet is ready. We await your command." The Emperor didn't respond immediately, his gaze still fixed on the stars beyond. "Do you know why we must do this?" he asked, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. The general hesitated, clearly unsure how to answer. "To secure the Empire's future, Your Excellency." The Emperor turned, his cold eyes locking onto the generals. "No, this is not about the Empire's future. This is about control. The humans have defied us for too long. They think themselves superior now, but they are still beneath us." He turned back to the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back. "We will crush them, not because they are a threat, but because we must remind the galaxy who truly holds power." The general bowed his head. "As you command, Your Excellency." The Emperor's eyes narrowed as he gazed out at the distant stars. The Terran expanse lay beyond them, a region of space that had become a thorn in his side. But soon it would be nothing more than a memory, and the Ascendants would be erased from existence. The Thalorian fleet surged through the outer rim of the Terran expanse, a formidable wall of warships cutting through the void. It was an awe-inspiring display of power, thousands of vessels, their hulls bristling with weaponry capable of reducing planets to dust. In the command center of the Emperor's flagship, Imperator, there was no hesitation, no second-guessing. They had done this many times before. But this time, they were marching into the unknown. The outer rim of the expanse was silent. No human warships greeted them. No planetary defense forces mobilized to meet the Empire's advance. It was as though the humans had already surrendered without a fight. But the Emperor knew better. His hands rested on the polished surface of the command console as he stared into the holographic projection of the expanse. "They're waiting for us," he murmured, more to himself than anyone in the room. His general, standing beside him, shifted uneasily. "Your Excellency, the sensors are clear. No sign of any human resistance." The Emperor didn't turn to look at him. His cold, calculating eyes remained fixed on the image of the starscape before them. "The Ascendants won't fight us in the conventional way. They've evolved beyond that." "Then, how will they fight?" A silence settled over the command center as the Emperor finally stood straight, turning to face his general. "They'll try to break us without firing a single shot." The general frowned, clearly not understanding. "I don't." Before he could finish, the ship's sensors went wild. An alarm blared, and the crew on the bridge scrambled to make sense of the incoming data. The Emperor's eyes narrowed as he strode toward the nearest console. "What is it?" he demanded. The officer manning the console struggled to find the right words. I don't know, Your Excellency. It's not an attack, but the space around us." The view outside the ship began to shift. The stars seemed to distort, warping and twisting in impossible ways. It was as though the fabric of space itself was unraveling, bending to a force that defied all comprehension. "Impossible," the general whispered, his voice trembling. What is this? The Emperor watched in silence, his face expressionless as the Thalorian fleet was swallowed by the strange phenomenon. The ships seemed to flicker, their forms blurring as though reality itself was coming undone. This is their power, the Emperor said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. This is what we're dealing with. The crew was in a frenzy, trying to regain control of their systems, but the Ascendants weren't attacking in any conventional sense. They were bending space, altering the laws of physics around the fleet, rendering the Empire's technological might useless. They're trying to demoralize us, the Emperor said, his voice now filled with cold fury. They want us to doubt, to fear. The general swallowed hard. What should we do, Your Excellency? The Emperor's eyes blazed. We press on. Valen stood at the center of the council chamber, his eyes closed as he reached out with his mind, feeling the warp in space as the Thalorian fleet entered the expanse. He could sense the fear and confusion rippling through their ranks, the disbelief that their mighty warships were being toyed with. The Emperor will not back down, Valen said softly, opening his eyes. He's too proud. He will press forward, even if it means leading his fleet into oblivion. One of the Ascendants, a woman with silver hair and eyes that shimmered with the light of distant stars, stepped forward. Should we not meet them head-on, crush them before they can advance any further? Valen shook his head. No, we are beyond brute force. The Emperor believes in strength through destruction. We will show him that true power lies in creation and in control. The silver-haired Ascendant frowned. But the fleet is massive. Even with our abilities, they could overwhelm us with sheer numbers. They won't, Valen said confidently. Not when we control the very fabric of space. Another Ascendant, his features sharp and angular, spoke from the shadows. And what of the Emperor? Will he not seek to challenge us directly? Valen's eyes darkened. He will try. But when he sees that his weapons are useless, he will be forced to listen. The council murmured in agreement, though some among them still seemed hesitant. The Ascendants were powerful, but they had never faced a foe like the Thalorian Empire. Their existence was at stake, and some feared that even their newfound abilities might not be enough. We have no choice but to stand firm, Valen said, his voice calm but resolute. The Empire sees us as a threat because they do not understand what we've become. We will show them the truth, and when they realize that they cannot win, we will offer them peace. The silver-haired Ascendant crossed her arms. And if they refuse? Valen's gaze hardened. Then we will erase them from existence. The warping of space continued around the fleet, the distortion growing more intense with each passing moment. The Emperor stood at the center of the bridge, his face an unreadable mask as his fleet struggled to adapt to the strange phenomenon. But he would not be deterred. Maintain formation, he ordered, his voice steady. Push forward. The humans are testing us. We will not yield. The general at his side looked pale, his hands trembling as he tried to steady himself. Your Excellency, we're detecting fluctuations in the ship's systems. Our weapons, they're offline. The Emperor's eyes flashed with cold fury. They're manipulating the fabric of reality itself, but they cannot change the will of the Empire. The distortion outside grew worse, and for a moment, the stars themselves seemed to vanish, replaced by a swirling void of darkness. The crew gasped in fear as the Imperator trembled, but the Emperor remained unmoved. They want us to fear the unknown, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But the Empire has conquered countless worlds, faced the most powerful foes in the galaxy. We will not be undone by parlor tricks. Suddenly, the void outside began to clear, and the stars reappeared. But something was different. The fleet was no longer in the same part of the galaxy. We've been displaced, the general whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. They moved us. The Emperor's gaze remained fixed on the stars beyond. No, they didn't move us. They moved the galaxy. The realization struck the crew like a hammer. The Ascendants hadn't just manipulated the space around them. They had altered the very structure of the universe. The Emperor clenched his fists, his fury boiling over. Enough of this. Prepare for full-scale assault. We will tear down their strongholds, rip the expanse apart if we have to. But, Your Excellency, I said enough, the Emperor bellowed, his voice shaking the very walls of the ship. They want us to believe they are gods, but they are still flesh and blood, and I will not be defeated by illusions. The general snapped to attention, saluting sharply. Yes, Your Excellency, we will proceed with the attack. As the Thalorian fleet prepared to advance once more, the Emperor's eyes gleamed with cold determination. This war would end in one of two ways, with the destruction of the Ascendants, or the annihilation of the Thalorian Empire. Valen felt the shift in the galaxy as the Thalorian fleet pressed forward. The Emperor had not been deterred by the manipulation of space. He was pushing ahead, driven by his arrogance and pride. He's coming, Valen said quietly, his eyes distant as he gazed into the infinite possibilities before them. He will stop at nothing. The silver-haired Ascendant frowned. Then we must act. If the Emperor reaches the core of the expanse, he will unleash everything at his disposal. Valen nodded. I know, but we cannot meet him with brute force. Not yet. The black-haired Ascendant, his face shadowed with doubt, stepped forward. Then what are we waiting for? Valen's expression hardened. We are waiting for the moment when the Emperor realizes that he has already lost. He turned to the council, his eyes glowing with the light of 1,000 stars. And when that moment comes, we will show him the true power of the Ascendants. The Ascendants nodded in agreement, their resolve strengthening. They knew that the coming battle would be unlike any they had faced before. But they also knew that they were no longer bound by the same rules as the rest of the galaxy. They were Ascendants, and they would not be defeated. The Thalorian fleet burned through the expanse, their engines glowing as they tore through the stars. Even as the space around them shifted and warped, even as reality itself seemed to twist, they pressed on. The Emperor's commands were absolute, there was no retreat, no hesitation. They were the mightiest force in the galaxy, and nothing would stand in their way. Inside the Imperator, the mood was tense but resolute. The Emperor stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the view beyond the ship's hull. He could see the distant glow of the expanse's core, the heart of the Ascendant's power. It was a sight that filled most men with awe, with fear. But not him, not the Emperor. They've grown arrogant, he said, his voice a low growl. They think they can rewrite the laws of the universe. But they are still bound by the same weaknesses as any other species. The general, still visibly shaken from the events that had displaced their fleet, nodded cautiously. Their technology is beyond anything we've encountered, Your Excellency, but their arrogance will be their downfall. The Emperor's lip curled into a cold smile. Exactly. They believe themselves to be gods, but I will remind them that no one is invincible. As the fleet advanced, the distortion in space grew worse. Ships flickered in and out of view, their forms blurring as they passed through invisible fields of warped space-time. It was a disorienting, nauseating experience for those on board, but the Emperor remained unaffected. His mind was fixed on one goal, victory. Prepare the fleet for assault, he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. We will not wait for them to strike first. The general hesitated for a moment. But, Your Excellency, our weapons. Do not question me, the Emperor snapped, his eyes blazing with fury. They are toying with us, but they cannot alter the resolve of the Empire. Prepare for full-scale bombardment. I will not allow these creatures to continue their mockery. The general quickly saluted and began issuing orders to the fleet. Across the vast armada, ships bristled with energy as they readied their weapons. Even though the Ascendants had rendered their technology ineffective in some areas, the Thalorians still had enough raw firepower to annihilate entire star systems, and the Emperor was more than willing to unleash it. Let them see the wrath of the Thalorian Empire, the Emperor muttered, his voice filled with cold determination. Valen stood on the observation deck of the Nexus, his gaze fixed on the distant glow of the Thalorian fleet. He could sense the Emperor's presence, feel the force of his will driving the armada forward. It was a force unlike anything the Ascendants had encountered before, raw, unrelenting, and filled with a deep, burning hatred. "They're preparing to attack," the silver-haired Ascendant said, stepping up beside Valen. "Their weapons are charging. They intend to wipe us out." Valen didn't move, his eyes still locked on the fleet. "Let them try." The silver-haired Ascendant frowned. "You're confident we can withstand a full-scale bombardment?" Valen finally turned to look at her, his expression calm and resolute. "We are not bound by the same limitations as they are. They rely on brute force. But we control the very fabric of reality itself. They will find that their weapons are useless here." The other Ascendants had gathered behind them, watching the Thalorian fleet with a mix of apprehension and determination. Some of them had never faced such a powerful enemy before, and the sheer scale of the Thalorian armada was enough to send a chill through even the most seasoned of their ranks. But Valen stood firm. He knew what was coming. "They think they can break us with firepower," he said quietly. "But they do not understand what we've become. They do not understand the true power of the Ascendants." The silver-haired Ascendant still looked uneasy. "And if they do, if the Emperor has some plan we haven't anticipated?" Valen's eyes darkened. "Then we will adapt, just as we always have." The countdown to the attack had begun. Across the Thalorian fleet, weapon systems hummed to life, their energy building to a critical mass. The ships glowed with the light of 1,000 suns, ready to unleash their fury on the Ascendant stronghold. The Emperor watched it all with a grim satisfaction. They will learn what happens when you challenge the Empire. The general stood nearby, overseeing the final preparations. "All systems are online, Your Excellency. We're ready to fire on your command." The Emperor didn't hesitate. "Commence the bombardment." At his command, the fleet unleashed its fury. Thousands of energy beams, missiles, and projectiles streaked through space, converging on the Nexus with the power to annihilate worlds. The combined might of the Thalorian armada bore down on the Ascendants, a storm of destruction that no force in the galaxy had ever survived. But the Nexus did not crumble. Instead, the space around it seemed to ripple, the very fabric of reality bending and shifting as the Ascendants exerted their control. The weapons fired by the Thalorian fleet never reached their target. They were absorbed, dispersed, or simply vanished into the void, as the Ascendants manipulated the laws of physics to render them harmless. The Emperor's eyes narrowed as he watched the spectacle. "So, they really have become something more." The general's voice was tinged with disbelief. "Our attacks, they had no effect." The Emperor clenched his fists, his anger simmering just below the surface. "They believe themselves invincible, but no one is invincible." Valen felt the strain of maintaining control over the Nexus's defenses, but he did not falter. The Thalorians were throwing everything they had at the Ascendants, but it wasn't enough. The Ascendants had transcended physical limitations, and their mastery of reality itself gave them an insurmountable advantage. But Valen knew that this was only the beginning. "They will not stop," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of inevitability. "The Emperor will keep coming, no matter how many times we repel him." The silver-haired Ascendant nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Then we must show him the futility of his actions. We must make him understand that this war cannot be won through force." Valen closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind to touch the vast expanse of space around them. He could feel the flow of energy, the currents of reality bending to the will of the Ascendants. It was a power that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a power that had the potential to reshape the galaxy. "We will make him understand," Valen said, his voice calm but resolute. "But first, we must push him to the brink." The Emperor stood in silence, watching as the Nexus remained untouched by the fleet's bombardment. His expression was unreadable, but the rage burning within him was palpable. "They dare mock us," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. They dare defy the might of the Empire. The general looked uneasy, his hands trembling as he glanced at the Emperor. Your Excellency, our weapons, they're ineffective. What do we do now? The Emperor's gaze shifted to the general, his eyes cold and calculating. We find their weakness. But they seem to have none. The Emperor's expression darkened. Everything has a weakness, General, even the gods. He turned away from the view of the Nexus, his mind racing as he considered his options. The Ascendants had proven themselves to be far more powerful than he had anticipated. But they were still flesh and blood, still bound by the same limitations as any other living beings. They rely on their control over space and time, the Emperor said, his voice growing more confident. But that control is not absolute. It requires concentration. Focus. The general frowned. What are you suggesting? The Emperor's eyes gleamed with cold determination. We break their concentration. We overwhelm them with chaos. The general blinked, clearly confused. But how? Launch the full fleet, the Emperor ordered, his voice filled with authority. All ships, all fighters, all drones. Swarm them. We'll force them to spread their attention, to divide their power. The general hesitated for a moment, then quickly saluted. At once, Your Excellency. As the orders were relayed, the Thalorian fleet began to mobilize. Fighters and drones poured from the hangars of the massive warships, forming a vast cloud of metal and energy that surged toward the Nexus. It was a strategy of overwhelming numbers, a tactic that had crushed countless enemies in the past. But would it be enough to break the Ascendants? The Emperor watched as the swarm closed in on the Nexus, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and fury. He knew that this was their last chance. If the Ascendants could not be defeated here, then the Empire would fall. And the Emperor would never allow that to happen. Valen felt the shift in the flow of battle as the swarm of fighters and drones descended upon the Nexus. It was a desperate move, an attempt to overwhelm the Ascendants with sheer numbers. But Valen's calm demeanor remained unchanged. He understood the tactics of the Thalorians well enough to recognize their desperation. Here they come, Valen said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. Prepare for the next phase of the defense. The Ascendants, though still weary from maintaining their defenses, sprang into action. Their command was clear and their movements coordinated. The Nexus itself seemed to pulse with renewed energy as the Ascendants prepared to meet the Thalorian onslaught. Focus on their swarm, Valen instructed. We need to keep them from penetrating our shields. The silver-haired Ascendant nodded, her expression resolute. We'll divide our forces to create a barrier. It'll funnel their attack into manageable sectors. The Ascendants moved with a precision that spoke of countless hours of training and battle experience. The Nexus's energy field shifted, creating barriers that glowed with an ethereal light. The barriers began to channel the swarm of Thalorian fighters and drones into narrower lanes, effectively limiting their access. Now, Valen said, his voice steady, we'll use their own tactics against them. As the Thalorian fleet pressed their attack, the Ascendants unleashed a series of countermeasures. Energy pulses, gravitational distortions, and quantum fluctuations combined to create an unpredictable and chaotic environment for the invaders. The Thalorian drones and fighters were thrown into disarray, their formations breaking apart as they struggled to navigate the chaotic fields. Hold steady, Valen commanded. We need to maintain the flow of energy through the barriers. The battle was intense, the energy from both sides creating a dazzling array of lights and explosions. But the Ascendants' control over reality allowed them to adapt and respond to the ever-changing conditions. Where the Thalorians saw chaos, the Ascendants saw opportunity. The swarm of Thalorian ships was gradually thinned out by the Ascendant defenses. The energy barriers absorbed and redirected much of the incoming fire, and the Thalorian fighters found their own attacks turned back upon them. Impressive, Valen said, watching the scene unfold. They have a lot of firepower, but they're still bound by their own limitations. The general aboard the Imperator watched the same scene unfold with growing frustration. His attempts to overwhelm the Ascendants had only led to greater losses. The swarm was not breaking through as intended, and the Emperor's plans seemed to be faltering. "Your Excellency," the general said, his voice strained. "Our forces are being repelled. The Ascendants' defenses are holding." The Emperor's eyes blazed with fury. "They are not invincible. We cannot allow them to stand in our way." He clenched his fists, his mind racing for a solution. "Send in the reserve fleet. We'll focus all available firepower on the Nexus. We'll bombard them with everything we've got." The general nodded, quickly relaying the new orders. More Thalorian ships surged forward, their guns primed and ready. The reserve fleet, smaller but still formidable, joined the attack. The space around the Nexus was soon filled with a renewed torrent of energy beams, missiles, and projectiles. Valen sensed the increase in the intensity of the attack. The additional Thalorian forces were overwhelming, and the strain on the Ascendant defenses was palpable. But Valen remained focused, drawing on the strength of the Nexus and the will of his people. "We need to reinforce the barriers," Valen said, his voice calm despite the mounting pressure. "Redirect additional energy to the weakest points." The Ascendants worked quickly, their actions precise and coordinated. Energy flowed through the Nexus's defenses, strengthening the barriers at critical points. The additional firepower from the Thalorian reserve fleet was met with a renewed resistance, the energy beams and missiles dissipating or being absorbed by the reinforced shields. "This is not enough," Valen muttered, his eyes scanning the battle. "We need to shift the tide." He reached out with his mind, extending his senses to the far reaches of the battle. The Thalorian forces were relentless, but they were still bound by their own limitations. Valen could feel their frustration, their growing desperation. "Prepare for a counteroffensive," Valen commanded. "We'll push back their forces and regain the initiative." The Ascendants responded with determination. They began to concentrate their energy, focusing it into concentrated bursts that pierced through the Thalorian swarm. The reserve fleet, already engaged in a fierce battle, found itself pushed back as the Ascendants fought to reclaim control of the space around the Nexus. The tide of battle began to shift. The Thalorian fighters and drones, caught off guard by the sudden counteroffensive, were driven back. The energy beams and missiles that had previously swarmed the Nexus now found themselves deflected or redirected. Valen watched the scene with a mix of satisfaction and caution. The battle was far from over, and the Thalorian fleet would not be easily defeated. But the Ascendants had regained their footing, and the Emperor's plans were beginning to unravel. The Emperor paced in the command chamber, his mind racing as he assessed the unfolding situation. The Thalorian reserve fleet was struggling, and the Ascendants had managed to push them back. His plan to overwhelm them had not gone as expected. "Find me a way to break their defenses," the Emperor commanded, his voice filled with frustration. "I will not be denied." The general, looking increasingly beleaguered, hesitated for a moment before responding. "We're analyzing their defenses, Your Excellency, but their control over reality seems to be a significant factor." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Then we must find a way to disrupt their control. If they are bound by their own limitations, then there must be a way to exploit them." He turned away, his mind racing with possibilities. The Ascendants had proven themselves to be a formidable opponent, but the Emperor was not one to admit defeat easily. He was determined to find a way to break their hold and secure victory for the Empire. As the battle raged on, the Thalorian fleet continued its assault, but the Ascendants had managed to turn the tide. The clash of energy and power filled the space around the Nexus, a testament to the high-stakes conflict that defined this moment in history. The Emperor's resolve was unshaken. He would find a way to win, no matter the cost. The Ascendants had shown their strength, but the Emperor was prepared to push his forces to the brink in order to achieve his goal. Valen stood at the heart of the Nexus, his mind focused on the battle unfolding around him. The Ascendants had managed to push back the Thalorian swarm, but Valen knew that the fight was far from over. The Emperor was a formidable opponent, and his determination was unyielding. "We've regained control for now," Valen said, his voice steady, "but we need to be prepared for another push." The silver-haired Ascendant nodded, her expression resolute. "We will be ready." Valen took a deep breath, drawing strength from the Nexus and the unity of his people. The battle was a test of endurance and will, and the Ascendants were determined to meet the challenge head-on. As the Thalorian fleet regrouped and prepared for their next move, the Ascendants braced themselves for the ongoing conflict. The battle for the Nexus was far from over, and both sides were prepared to push their limits in order to achieve victory. Valen knew that the fight ahead would be intense, but he was confident in the strength of the Ascendants. They had faced many challenges before, and they would face this one with the same resolve and determination. The battle raged on, a clash of wills and power that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The Thalorians were relentless, but the Ascendants were unyielding. And as the conflict continued, Valen knew that the ultimate outcome would be shaped by the strength and determination of those who fought for their ideals. The Nexus stood as a beacon of hope and resilience, a symbol of the power of the Ascendants and their determination to protect their world. And as the battle unfolded, the galaxy watched with bated breath, waiting to see which side would emerge victorious. The Emperor's anger was palpable as he watched the battle unfold. The Ascendants had managed to turn the tide, and the Thalorian fleet was struggling to regain the upper hand. His frustration mounted with each passing moment. "Increase firepower to maximum," the Emperor commanded, his voice cold and steely. "We will break their defenses if it takes every ship in our fleet." The general nodded, his face set in grim determination. "Yes, Your Excellency." The Thalorian fleet responded with a renewed barrage, their weapons firing at maximum capacity. The energy beams and missiles converged on the Nexus, creating a storm of destruction that threatened to overwhelm the Ascendant defenses. Valen felt the pressure of the renewed assault, but remained resolute. The Ascendants were prepared to face the full might of the Thalorian fleet, and they would not falter. "We hold the line," Valen said, his voice steady. "We will not allow them to breach our defenses." The Ascendants fought with unwavering determination, their control over reality allowing them to counter the Thalorian attack. The space around the Nexus was filled with the brilliant light of energy beams and the explosive force of missiles, a testament to the fierce struggle between the two sides. The battle continued, a clash of titans that would shape the destiny of the galaxy. The Thalorians were relentless, but the Ascendants were unyielding, and as the conflict raged on, both sides prepared for the next phase of their struggle. The outcome of the battle remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the fight for the Nexus was far from over. The Thalorian fleet would not rest until their mission was accomplished, and the Ascendants would not relent in their defense. The crescendo of battle reached a fever pitch as the Thalorian reserve fleet pushed forward with renewed ferocity. The space around the Nexus was now a chaotic ballet of energy and destruction, with the Ascendants struggling to maintain their defenses against the overwhelming barrage. Valen's gaze remained steady as he observed the scene from his command center. The Nexus itself was a formidable structure, but even it was strained under the relentless assault. The energy barriers flickered, their integrity tested by the sheer volume of Thalorian firepower. "Status report," Valen commanded, his voice calm but firm. A younger Ascendant, his face etched with concentration, relayed the information. "We're holding, but barely. The additional firepower is pushing us to our limits. The outer shields are at 30% capacity." Valen's expression hardened. "We need to stabilize the shields. Divert all available power to the outer defenses. We cannot afford to let them breach our lines." The Ascendants responded with efficiency, their hands moving swiftly to reroute energy and reinforce the failing shields. Valen's mind raced as he considered their options. The Thalorians were using every trick in their arsenal, and their determination was evident in their relentless assault. "Prepare for a tactical shift," Valen said, his voice steady. "We'll use our gravitational manipulation to create localized anomalies. It should disrupt their targeting systems and buy us some time." The Ascendants set to work, manipulating the gravitational fields around the nexus. The space began to distort, creating waves of instability that disrupted the precision of Thalorian weaponry. The Thalorian fleet, caught off guard by the sudden change, found their attacks becoming increasingly erratic. "Good," Valen muttered, watching the effects of the anomalies. "Keep it up. We need to turn the tide." The Ascendants continued their efforts, using their control over reality to counter the Thalorian assault. The Emperor's frustration boiled over as he observed the effects of the Ascendant countermeasures. The gravitational anomalies were disrupting the Thalorian assault, causing their firepower to lose effectiveness. The once dominant reserve fleet was now struggling to land accurate hits on the Nexus. "Damn it!" the Emperor roared, slamming his fist on the armrest of his throne. "They're turning our tactics against us." The general, looking increasingly disheveled, attempted to offer a solution. "We're working on recalibrating our targeting systems to compensate for the anomalies. But it's slow progress, Your Excellency." The Emperor's eyes blazed with anger. "We need a new strategy. If we can't penetrate their defenses, we'll have to force them to expose their weaknesses." He turned to his advisors, his mind racing for a solution. "Prepare a strike force for a direct assault. We'll force our way through their defenses and target the Nexus's core. If we can destabilize it from within, they'll be forced to retreat." The advisors nodded, quickly relaying the new orders. The Thalorian fleet began to regroup, preparing for a bold and risky maneuver. The strike force, consisting of the most elite units, readied themselves for the direct assault on the Nexus. Valen sensed a shift in the battle as the Thalorians adjusted their strategy. The gravitational anomalies had bought them some time, but the Thalorian fleet was regrouping for a more aggressive push. Valen knew that their situation was precarious. "Brace for impact," Valen instructed. "They're preparing a direct assault." The Ascendants fortified their defenses, preparing for the Thalorian strike force that was heading their way. The space around the Nexus was filled with a tense silence as the two sides prepared for the decisive phase of the battle. The Thalorian strike force, a powerful and elite group, emerged from the ranks of the reserve fleet. Their ships were heavily armed and reinforced, designed for a direct assault on the Nexus's core. The energy beams and missiles converged on the Nexus, creating a storm of destruction that threatened to breach the defenses. Valen watched the scene with a mix of determination and anxiety. The Thalorian assault was intense, and the Ascendants were pushed to their limits. The energy barriers around the Nexus flickered and strained, their integrity tested by the relentless barrage. "Redirect all available power to the core defenses," Valen commanded. "We cannot let them breach the central chamber." The Ascendants responded with swift efficiency, rerouting energy to reinforce the core defenses. The Nexus's energy field shifted, creating additional barriers and fortifications to protect the critical areas. The Thalorian strike force pressed their attack, their ships maneuvering with precision to target the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was filled with the blinding light of energy beams and the explosive force of missiles. The Ascendants fought with unwavering resolve, their control over reality allowing them to counter the assault. The Emperor's gaze was fixed on the unfolding battle, his mind focused on the outcome of the direct assault. The Thalorian strike force was making progress, their ships pushing through the Ascendant defenses. The Emperor's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Is the core destabilization proceeding as planned?" the Emperor asked, his voice cold and calculating. The general nodded, his expression grim. "Yes, Your Excellency. We're making progress. The Nexus's core is showing signs of instability. It should be only a matter of time before it collapses." The Emperor's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Excellent. Continue the assault. We will break their defenses and force them to surrender." The Thalorian strike force continued their relentless attack, their ships converging on the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was a chaotic battleground, with energy beams and missiles streaking through the void. Valen watched with growing concern as the Thalorian assault pressed forward. The core defenses were holding, but the strain was evident. The energy barriers flickered, their integrity tested by the intense barrage. "We need to act quickly," Valen said, his voice steady. "Prepare a counteroffensive. We'll push back their strike force and stabilize the core." The Ascendants sprang into action, their movements coordinated and precise. They focused their energy on disrupting the Thalorian assault and stabilizing the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was filled with a dazzling array of energy and light as the Ascendants fought to regain control. Valen's resolve was unwavering as he commanded the Ascendants in their fight against the Thalorian strike force. The core of the Nexus was critical, and they had to prevent it from being destabilized. "Reinforce the core defenses," Valen ordered. "We cannot allow them to breach the central chamber." The Ascendants worked with relentless determination, their control over reality allowing them to counter the Thalorian assault. The energy barriers around the Nexus flickered and strained, but they held firm. The Thalorian strike force continued their attack, their ships maneuvering with precision to target the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was a chaotic battlefield, with energy beams and missiles converging on the central chamber. Valen felt the pressure of the battle mounting, but he remained focused. The Ascendants were determined to protect their world and their ideals. They fought with unwavering resolve, their control over reality allowing them to counter the Thalorian assault. As the battle raged on, the Ascendants managed to push back the Thalorian strike force, regaining control of the space around the Nexus. The core defenses were stabilized, and the Thalorian assault began to lose its intensity. Valen's eyes remained fixed on the battle, his mind focused on the outcome. The Thalorians were a formidable opponent, but the Ascendants were determined to defend their world. The fight for the Nexus was far from over, but Valen was confident in the strength and resilience of his people. The battle continued, a clash of wills and power that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The Ascendants fought with unyielding determination, and the Thalorian fleet prepared for the next phase of their struggle. The Emperor's frustration grew as the Thalorian strike force faced increasing resistance. The Ascendants had managed to stabilize their core defenses, and the direct assault was losing its effectiveness. "Adjust our strategy," the Emperor commanded, his voice cold and unyielding. "We need to break their defenses and force them to surrender." The general nodded, his face set in grim determination. "We're analyzing their defenses for any weaknesses, Your Excellency, but it's proving difficult." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Then we must find a way to exploit their vulnerabilities. We cannot afford to lose this battle." He turned away, his mind racing with possibilities. The Ascendants had proven themselves to be a formidable opponent, but the Emperor was determined to find a way to secure victory. Valen stood at the heart of the Nexus, his mind focused on the battle unfolding around him. The Ascendants had managed to push back the Thalorian swarm, but Valen knew that the fight was far from over. The Emperor was a formidable opponent, and his determination was unyielding. "We've regained control for now," Valen said, his voice steady. "But we need to be prepared for another push." The silver-haired Ascendant nodded, her expression resolute. "We will be ready." Valen took a deep breath, drawing strength from the Nexus and the unity of his people. The battle was a test of endurance and will, and the Ascendants were determined to meet the challenge head-on. As the Thalorian fleet regrouped and prepared for their next move, the Ascendants braced themselves for the ongoing conflict. The battle for the Nexus was far from over, and both sides were prepared to push their limits in order to achieve victory. Valen knew that the fight ahead would be intense, but he was confident in the strength of the Ascendants. They had faced many challenges before, and they would face this one with the same resolve and determination. The battle raged on, a clash of wills and power that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The Thalorians were relentless, but the Ascendants were unyielding, and as the conflict continued, Valen knew that the ultimate outcome would be shaped by the strength and determination of those who fought for their ideals. The Nexus stood as a beacon of hope and resilience, a symbol of the power of the Ascendants and their determination to protect their world. And as the battle unfolded, the galaxy watched with bated breath, waiting to see which side would emerge victorious. The Emperor's anger was palpable as he watched the battle unfold. The Ascendants had managed to turn the tide, and the Thalorian fleet was struggling to regain the upper hand. His frustration mounted with each passing moment. "Increase firepower to maximum," the Emperor commanded, his voice cold and steely. "We will break their defenses if it takes every ship in our fleet." The general nodded, his face set in grim determination. "Yes, Your Excellency." The Thalorian fleet responded with a renewed barrage, their weapons firing at maximum capacity. The energy beams and missiles converged on the Nexus, creating a storm of destruction that threatened to overwhelm the Ascendant defenses. Valen felt the pressure of the renewed assault but remained resolute. The Ascendants were prepared to face the full might of the Thalorian fleet, and they would not falter. "We hold the line," Valen said, his voice steady. "We will not allow them to breach our defenses." The Ascendants fought with unwavering determination, their control over reality allowing them to counter the Thalorian attack. The space around the Nexus was filled with the brilliant light of energy beams and the explosive force of missiles, a testament to the fierce struggle between the two sides. The battle continued, a clash of titans that would shape the destiny of the galaxy. The Thalorians were relentless, but the Ascendants were unyielding, and as the conflict raged on, both sides prepared for the next phase of their struggle. The crescendo of battle reached a fever pitch as the Thalorian reserve fleet pushed forward with renewed ferocity. The space around the Nexus was now a chaotic ballet of energy and destruction, with the Ascendants struggling to maintain their defenses against the overwhelming barrage. Valen's gaze remained steady as he observed the scene from his command center. The Nexus itself was a formidable structure, but even it was strained under the relentless assault. The energy barriers flickered, their integrity tested by the sheer volume of Thalorian firepower. "Status report," Valen commanded, his voice calm but firm. A younger Ascendant, his face etched with concentration, relayed the information. "We're holding, but barely. The additional firepower is pushing us to our limits. The outer shields are at 30% capacity." Valen's expression hardened. "We need to stabilize the shields, divert all available power to the outer defenses. We cannot afford to let them breach our lines." The Ascendants responded with efficiency, their hands moving swiftly to reroute energy and reinforce the failing shields. Valen's mind raced as he considered their options. The Thalorians were using every trick in their arsenal, and their determination was evident in their relentless assault. "Prepare for a tactical shift," Valen said, his voice steady. "We'll use our gravitational manipulation to create localized anomalies. It should disrupt their targeting systems and buy us some time." The Ascendants set to work, manipulating the gravitational fields around the Nexus. The space began to distort, creating waves of instability that disrupted the precision of Thalorian weaponry. The Thalorian fleet, caught off guard by the sudden change, found their attacks becoming increasingly erratic. "Good," Valen muttered, watching the effects of the anomalies. "Keep it up. We need to turn the tide." The Ascendants continued their efforts, using their control over reality to counter the Thalorian assault. The space around the Nexus was filled with a dazzling array of energy and light, a testament to the fierce struggle between the two sides. The Emperor's frustration boiled over as he observed the effects of the Ascendant countermeasures. The gravitational anomalies were disrupting the Thalorian assault, causing their firepower to lose effectiveness. The once dominant reserve fleet was now struggling to land accurate hits on the Nexus. "Damn it!" the Emperor roared, slamming his fist on the armrest of his throne. "They're turning our tactics against us." The general, looking increasingly disheveled, attempted to offer a solution. "We're working on recalibrating our targeting systems to compensate for the anomalies, but it's slow progress, Your Excellency." The Emperor's eyes blazed with anger. "We need a new strategy. If we can't penetrate their defenses, we'll have to force them to expose their weaknesses." He turned to his advisors, his mind racing for a solution. "Prepare a strike force for a direct assault. We'll force our way through their defenses and target the Nexus's core. If we can destabilize it from within, they'll be forced to retreat." The advisors nodded, quickly relaying the new orders. The Thalorian fleet began to regroup, preparing for a bold and risky maneuver. The strike force, consisting of the most elite units, readied themselves for the direct assault on the Nexus. Valen sensed a shift in the battle as the Thalorians adjusted their strategy. The gravitational anomalies had bought them some time, but the Thalorian fleet was regrouping for a more aggressive push. Valen knew that their situation was precarious. "Brace for impact," Valen instructed. "They're preparing a direct assault." The Ascendants fortified their defenses, preparing for the Thalorian strike force that was heading their way. The space around the Nexus was filled with a tense silence as the two sides prepared for the decisive phase of the battle. The Thalorian strike force, a powerful and elite group, emerged from the ranks of the reserve fleet. Their ships were heavily armed and reinforced, designed for a direct assault on the Nexus's core. The energy beams and missiles converged on the Nexus, creating a storm of destruction that threatened to breach the defenses. Valen watched the scene with a mix of determination and anxiety. The Thalorian assault was intense, and the Ascendants were pushed to their limits. The energy barriers around the Nexus flickered and strained, their integrity tested by the relentless barrage. "Redirect all available power to the core defenses," Valen commanded. "We cannot let them breach the central chamber." The Ascendants responded with swift efficiency, rerouting energy to reinforce the core defenses. The Nexus's energy field shifted, creating additional barriers and fortifications to protect the critical areas. The Thalorian strike force pressed their attack, their ships maneuvering with precision to target the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was filled with the blinding light of energy beams and the explosive force of missiles. The Ascendants fought with unwavering resolve, their control over reality allowing them to counter the assault. The Emperor's gaze was fixed on the unfolding battle, his mind focused on the outcome of the direct assault. The Thalorian strike force was making progress, their ships pushing through the Ascendant defenses. The Emperor's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Is the core destabilization proceeding as planned?" the Emperor asked, his voice cold and calculating. The general nodded, his expression grim. "Yes, Your Excellency. We're making progress. The Nexus's core is showing signs of instability. It should be only a matter of time before it collapses." The Emperor's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Excellent. Continue the assault. We will break their defenses and force them to surrender." The Thalorian strike force continued their relentless attack, their ships converging on the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was a chaotic battleground, with energy beams and missiles streaking through the void. Valen watched with growing concern as the Thalorian assault pressed forward. The core defenses were holding, but the strain was evident. The energy barriers flickered, their integrity tested by the intense barrage. "We need to act quickly," Valen said, his voice steady. "Prepare a counteroffensive. We'll push back their strike force and stabilize the core." The Ascendants sprang into action, their movements coordinated and precise. They focused their energy on disrupting the Thalorian assault and stabilizing the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was filled with a dazzling array of energy and light as the Ascendants fought to regain control. Valen's resolve was unwavering as he commanded the Ascendants in their fight against the Thalorian strike force. The core of the Nexus was critical, and they had to prevent it from being destabilized. "Reinforce the core defenses," Valen ordered. "We cannot allow them to breach the central chamber." The Ascendants worked with relentless determination, their control over reality allowing them to counter the Thalorian assault. The energy barriers around the Nexus flickered and strained, but they held firm. The Thalorian strike force continued their attack, their ships maneuvering with precision to target the Nexus's core. The space around the Nexus was a chaotic battlefield, with energy beams and missiles converging on the central chamber. Valen felt the pressure of the battle mounting, but he remained focused. The Ascendants were determined to protect their world and their ideals. They fought with unwavering resolve, their control over reality allowing them to counter the Thalorian assault. As the battle raged on, the Ascendants managed to push back the Thalorian strike force, regaining control of the space around the Nexus. The core defenses were stabilized, and the Thalorian assault began to lose its intensity. Valen's eyes remained fixed on the battle, his mind focused on the outcome. The Thalorians were a formidable opponent, but the Ascendants were determined to defend their world. The fight for the Nexus was far from over, but Valen was confident in the strength and resilience of his people. The battle continued, a clash of wills and power that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The Ascendants fought with unyielding determination, and the Thalorian fleet prepared for the next phase of their struggle. The Emperor's frustration grew as the Thalorian strike force faced increasing resistance. The Ascendants had managed to stabilize their core defenses, and the direct assault was losing its effectiveness. "Adjust our strategy," the Emperor commanded, his voice cold and unyielding. "We need to break their defenses and force them to surrender." The general nodded, his face set in grim determination. "We're analyzing their defenses for any weaknesses, Your Excellency, but it's proving difficult." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Then we must find a way to exploit their vulnerabilities. We cannot afford to lose this battle." He turned away, his mind racing with possibilities. The Ascendants had proven themselves to be a formidable opponent, but the Emperor was determined to find a way to secure victory. As the battle raged on, the Thalorian fleet prepared for their next move. The outcome of the conflict remained uncertain, but both sides were prepared to push their limits in order to achieve their goals. Valen's log. The momentary lull in the battle allowed me a brief second to catch my breath. Sweat trickled down my temple as I stared at the tactical display. The Nexus's shields flickered like dying embers, barely holding on, but holding nonetheless. The Thalorians had thrown everything at us, and yet we were still standing. "How long until they regroup?" I asked, my voice hoarse but steady. I couldn't afford to let my team see any doubt. 10 minutes, maybe less," replied Thero, the young strategist to my left, his fingers flying across the control panel. "They're recalibrating after that last anomaly burst. Their strike teams are still circling, but no major movement yet." 10 minutes. It wasn't enough, but it never was. I leaned closer to the display, scanning the readouts, hoping for some miracle. "Valen," Thero's voice dropped slightly, a note of urgency slipping in. "If they breach the inner core, the reactors will overload. We're too close to the fail-safes being compromised." I didn't need the reminder, but I appreciated his concern. If the Thalorians managed to breach the Nexus's core, everything we had worked for, everything we had built would collapse in a cascade of energy so fierce it would take out half the system. But I couldn't let that fear cloud my judgment. "I know," I said, keeping my voice calm. "That's why we won't let them get that far." Thero gave a small nod, but the unease in his eyes remained. He was young, idealistic, like most of the new recruits. He hadn't been hardened by the weight of command. "Not yet." "We need more time," I muttered under my breath, scanning the tactical display. My mind raced. We'd already played our cards: gravitational anomalies, shield reinforcements, but the Thalorians were relentless, adapting quicker than I'd anticipated. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. If they're coming for the core, they'll need to breach from 3 sides. That gives us a window. Thero glanced up at me, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you thinking?" "We pull them in." I tapped the controls, zooming in on the central section of the Nexus. "We let them think they're close. I'll take a strike team to the outer edges, and when they move in, we collapse the grid on them. I want the rest of the fleet to stay back and reinforce the core." "Wait, you're leading the strike team yourself?" Thero's eyes widened. "But, Commander, I won't ask my men to do something I'm not willing to do myself," I cut him off, the tone in my voice making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. He stared at me for a moment, clearly wanting to argue, but he bit his tongue. "Understood, sir. I'll prepare the team." Make sure we have the most experienced pilots, I added. We can't afford any mistakes. Thero nodded and began relaying orders, his hands moving swiftly across the console. The hum of the engines beneath my feet was a familiar comfort, though today it felt heavier, laden with the gravity of what we were about to face. The strike team assembled behind me 6 men, all veterans of countless battles. They knew what was at stake, and they trusted me to lead them through it. Commander, Darius, my second in command, broke the silence as the cruiser neared the outer edges of the Nexus. His rough features were set in determination, but there was a flicker of doubt behind his eyes. Are you sure this is the right move? Do you have a better idea? I asked, my gaze fixed ahead on the starfield, broken only by the distant flashes of Thalorian ships positioning for their next strike. Darius grunted, but he didn't push further. He knew better than to question me at this point. We were well past second-guessing each other's judgment. I turned to face the team. This is it. We're going to bait them in, make them think they've got an opening, and then we close the trap. No hesitation, no mistakes. You all know the cost if we fail. They nodded, their faces set in grim focus. I could see it in their eyes. This wasn't just about the mission. It was about defending everything we stood for. The moment we broke through the outer shield line, we were met with a barrage of energy blasts. The Thalorians hadn't wasted time. Evasive maneuvers, I barked, gripping the edge of the console as our ship lurched sideways to avoid a direct hit. The hull groaned under the strain, but we pushed forward, weaving between bursts of enemy fire. Shields down to 60%, one of the crew reported, his voice strained but calm. We can't take another direct hit like that. We won't have to, I muttered, narrowing my eyes at the enemy formation. They're clustering too tight. They're overconfident. And that would be their downfall. Deploy the charges, I commanded. Create a feedback loop through the gravitational field. Darius nodded, his hands moving swiftly over the controls. The charges released from the ship, small blips on the radar, but they carried a devastating punch. They would amplify the gravitational distortions we had already created, causing the Thalorian ships to lose control of their navigation systems. They would be sitting ducks. Charges deployed. Detonation in 5. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity as we dodged and weaved through enemy fire. Then, detonation. The space around us rippled as the charges went off, creating massive gravitational distortions. The Thalorian ships staggered, their trajectories thrown into chaos. Several collided with one another, their shields unable to compensate for the sudden shift. Now, I shouted, push forward. Our strike cruisers surged ahead, breaking through the chaos. We closed in on the central formation of the Thalorian fleet, targeting their command ships. Focus fire on their lead ship, I ordered, my voice cold and unyielding. Take it out, and the rest will fall apart. Darius and the others didn't hesitate. Our ships unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, striking the Thalorian command ship with pinpoint precision. Its shields flared and buckled under the onslaught, and within moments, the vessel erupted in a blinding explosion. The ripple effect was immediate. The Thalorian fleet faltered, their formations collapsing without clear leadership. It was exactly the opening we needed. Commander, we've broken through their line, Darius reported, his voice laced with triumph. I exhaled slowly, allowing myself a brief moment of satisfaction. Good. Pull back to the Nexus. We've done what we needed to. As we made our retreat, the Thalorian fleet scrambled to reorganize, but the damage was done. We had bought ourselves time to reinforce the Nexus, time to regroup for the next assault. But I knew this wasn't the end. The Thalorians wouldn't give up so easily. I returned to the command center, where Thero was waiting, his expression a mix of relief and tension. Report, I said, stepping up to the central console. We've managed to stabilize the core defenses, Thero said, his voice steady but his eyes still wary. The Thalorians are pulling back for now, but we're not in the clear yet. I nodded, my mind already working through the next steps. They'll regroup. They always do. But this gives us a chance to fortify. Tharo hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Sir, we took a significant risk out there, if they had seen through the trap. They didn't, I cut him off. And now we're still standing. That's all that matters. He nodded, though I could tell he still had his doubts. But doubts had no place here, not now. We had survived this round, but the war was far from over. Across the void, I imagined the Emperor watching, his anger simmering as his fleet limped away from the Nexus, licking their wounds. He had underestimated us, underestimated what we were willing to do to defend our home. But he wouldn't make that mistake again. Commander Valen, Darius said, stepping up beside me. What's our next move? I stared at the tactical display, my mind turning over the possibilities. The Thalorians would come back, and when they did, they would come with everything they had. We prepare, I said quietly, my gaze hardening. And when they come, we show them why the Nexus has never fallen. Darius nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Understood. As I looked out at the stars, I knew this fight was far from over. The Thalorians thought they could crush us with brute force, but they didn't understand. This wasn't just a battle for territory or power. This was a battle for survival. And we would survive. Whatever it took. The hum of the Nexus around me was steady, almost reassuring, but I could feel the weight of the coming storm. This battle was only a glimpse of what was to come, and the galaxy was about to witness the full might of what it meant to be human. I could feel it deep in my bones and ache, a hunger for victory that went beyond strategy, beyond simple survival. This was our fight to win. Commander Valen, Tharo called from his station, pulling me from my thoughts. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the strain in his posture. We all felt it. The edge of fear, the taste of uncertainty. Go ahead, I replied, stepping back to the central console. The map of the sector flickered, showing the retreating Thalorian forces. Their movements were erratic, scattered, but I knew better than to be lulled into a false sense of security. They're regrouping faster than we anticipated. A full frontal assault within the hour seems likely, Tharo said, his fingers flying over the keys. But there's something else. I raised an eyebrow. What is it? Tharo hesitated for a moment before he brought up a new set of readings on the display. It's a shift in their energy signatures. It looks like they're diverting power to some kind of new system, but we haven't seen anything like it before. Our sensors can't make heads or tails of it. A chill ran down my spine. The Thalorians had been full of surprises since the war began, and every new trick they pulled had pushed us closer to the edge. But this time, I could sense something different, something dangerous. Keep monitoring it, I said, my voice low. We need to know exactly what they're planning. Tharo nodded, his face pale but determined. I couldn't help but admire the kid. He hadn't been in this long, but he had guts. And right now, we all needed that kind of resolve. I made my way down to the barracks, wanting to check in with the men personally. I wasn't the type to give rousing speeches or make promises I couldn't keep, but I knew that my presence mattered. Humans were resilient, but that resilience came from solidarity, from knowing that we stood together no matter what. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing rows of soldiers gearing up for the next wave. They moved with practiced efficiency, but the weight of the war was clear in their eyes. These men had seen the horrors of battle, the brutality of alien invasions, and yet they kept going. Not because they were ordered to, but because they knew, deep down, that humanity could not be broken. Commander, Darius greeted me with a nod, pulling his gloves tight as he approached. We're ready for the next wave. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the men. Some were older, veterans of countless campaigns. Others were younger, their faces marked by a mix of fear and determination. But they all had one thing in common: they were human, and that meant they were dangerous. What do you think? I asked, leaning against the wall. Do you think they'll come at us with the same tactics? Darius shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. They'd be idiots if they did. But then again, We've been underestimated before. I couldn't help but chuckle at that. Yeah, we have. It wasn't arrogance, it was fact. Every race we'd encountered had looked at us as just another species to be dominated, another obstacle in their path to galactic supremacy. But they were wrong. Humanity wasn't just another cog in the cosmic machine. We were the wild card, the unpredictable force that didn't fit into anyone's neat little boxes. We've been underestimated since the day we stepped onto the galactic stage, I said, louder now, addressing the room. They see us as fragile, as weak. But they don't understand us. They don't understand what it means to be human. The men stopped what they were doing, turning to listen. Darius stood beside me, his expression unreadable, but I could feel the shift in the air. They needed this. They needed to remember why we fought, why we refused to back down. They don't know what drives us, I continued, my voice steady. They don't know about the centuries of struggle we endured to even get here. The wars, the famines, the disasters. Hell, they don't know about the failures, the times we almost tore ourselves apart. And yet, every single time, we rebuilt. We evolved. We didn't just survive, we thrived. I could see the fire igniting in their eyes, the spark that had kept humanity alive for millennia. I wasn't one for grand speeches, but this wasn't about inspiration. This was about truth. They think we're fragile because we break. But they don't know that when we break, we come back stronger. We learn. We adapt. And right now, they're about to find out just how strong we've become. The room was silent for a moment, but I could feel the tension shifting, the fear giving way to something else. Resolve. Determination. Darius stepped forward, a grin spreading across his face. You heard the commander. Let's show these bastards what humanity's really made of. A chorus of agreement rippled through the room, and I could feel the energy rising. This was who we were. Fighters. Survivors. And we weren't going to let some alien empire tell us otherwise. Back in the command center, the tension was thick. The Thalorian fleet had repositioned, and the readings from their new energy signatures were growing more erratic. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. They're making their move, Thero said, his fingers flying over the console. Their lead ship is diverting power. Looks like they're charging up for something big. An energy weapon? I asked, leaning over his shoulder to get a closer look. I don't think so, Thero replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. It's more like a focused pulse, but we've never seen anything like it before. I clenched my jaw. The Thalorians were pulling out all the stops, and we were running out of time. Get the shield generators on standby, I ordered, and prepare the fleet for evasive maneuvers. I don't want to be caught off guard. Thero nodded, relaying the orders. I watched the tactical display as the Thalorian ships shifted into position, their movements precise and calculated. They weren't going to rush this. They wanted to make sure we couldn't retaliate. But they had forgotten one thing. We weren't like the other species they had conquered. We didn't play by the same rules. Commander, Darius called from the other side of the room, his voice urgent. We've got a breach in Sector 9. Looks like they're sending in ground troops. I swore under my breath. The Thalorians weren't just relying on their ships, they were hitting us from all angles. Deploy the defense drones, I ordered, and get the strike teams ready. We're not giving them an inch. Darius moved quickly, issuing commands to the troops on the ground. I could see the flashes of light on the display as our defense drones engaged the Thalorian ground forces. But it wasn't enough. We needed to turn the tide. Minutes later, I was back in the thick of it, leading my strike team through the Nexus's lower levels. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal, but I pushed forward, my rifle at the ready. They're pushing hard on the east side, Darius said, his voice tight with focus as we moved through the corridors. We've got drones taking out most of their forward units, but they're sending in reinforcements. We'll cut them off at the choke point, I replied, gesturing for the team to follow me. We hold the line here. As we rounded the corner, I caught sight of the Thalorian troops advancing. They moved with precision, their armor gleaming in the dim light. But they didn't have what we had. They didn't have the fire in their eyes, the burning will to fight back, no matter what. "Take positions," I barked, dropping to one knee as I opened fire. My rifle spat out a stream of energy bolts, tearing through the Thalorian ranks. The others followed suit, their shots precise and deadly. The Thalorians hesitated, their advance faltering as they realized they weren't facing a retreat. They were facing a wall of human determination. "They're breaking," Darius shouted, his voice filled with a fierce grin. I didn't need to respond. I could feel it. We were winning. The Thalorian forces had retreated once more, their ships pulling back into the outer reaches of the system. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. "They'll be back," I said, watching the tactical display as the last of the Thalorian ships disappeared from the radar. "And when they come, they'll come harder." Thero nodded, but there was a gleam of something in his eyes. Hope, confidence. Drax's log. The pulse hit us like a tidal wave. I grabbed the edge of my console, the entire ship groaning under the strain as the Thalorian gravity weapon collapsed the local space-time around us. I could feel it in my bones, the distortion, the sheer power they were harnessing. It wasn't just a weapon to destroy ships or crack planets. This was something far worse. "They've gone mad," I muttered under my breath, clenching my teeth. My crew scrambled, but there was a stillness in me, a sharp clarity that only came in the heart of chaos. We should have expected this. The Thalorians had always been desperate to break humanity, ever since the first encounter. We were new to their galactic game, wild and untamed compared to their rigid order. But now they were afraid, and fear makes an empire reckless. Thero's voice buzzed over the comms from the Nexus control room. "Commander Drax, gravity distortions peaking. We're reading massive fluctuations across the system." "I see it, Lieutenant," I growled, eyes locked on the tactical display. Their flagship wasn't just retreating, it was turning into something else, something beyond conventional warfare. The energy they were channeling into that device was warping space itself, twisting the fabric of reality around them. The room around me flickered, light warping unnaturally as the ship's gravity stabilizers struggled to compensate. I had never felt so small in all my years of war. The Thalorians were tampering with forces far beyond their understanding, and they dragged us into the maw of it. "Weapon status," I barked. My crew snapped to attention despite the gravity distortions rocking the ship. "Our heavy cannons are charged, but we've got a major systems overload on Deck 3, my second in command," Kellen reported. "If they hit us with another pulse like that, we'll be flying blind." "Patch up what you can, Kellen," I ordered, my voice low and steady. "We're not dead yet." Kellen nodded, grim but focused. He wasn't new to battle either, but even he looked rattled. We all knew what this was, our enemy's desperation manifest. If we didn't stop that flagship soon, it wouldn't just be us who suffered. That ripple of distorted space would expand outward, and the entire star system could collapse into a singularity. Thero's voice buzzed again in my ear. "Commander Drax, they're powering up for another pulse. If they hit us again—" "They won't," I snapped, cutting him off. "We're taking that ship down, now." The Resolute was my ship, my pride. She'd seen more battles than most commanders could ever dream of surviving. My crew seasoned warriors, each of them were the best the Terran expanse had to offer, and they knew me well enough to follow my lead without question, even in the face of a weapon that defied the laws of physics. "Lock all weapons on the flagship," I ordered, my eyes cold and sharp as I watched the tactical display. "Prepare for concentrated fire. We're pushing the reactor to its limits as it is." "Sir," Kellen warned, his voice tight. "Another full barrage like that might blow our own systems apart." "Then we'll blow apart after them," I said, my jaw set. "We end this now, or we don't end it at all." He didn't argue. He knew me too well for that. The tension on the bridge was a living thing, thick in the air as my crew worked in unison. Systems blinked, weapons primed, and the thrum of the ship's reactor grew louder, vibrating beneath our feet. The Thalorian flagship loomed on the main display, its hull glowing faintly with the sickly light of whatever monstrosity they were using to warp space. It had once been a magnificent vessel, sleek and deadly, but now it was twisted literally. The ship's frame buckled and groaned, barely holding together as the gravity distortions ripped at its core. "Firing solution locked," Kellen said, sweat beading on his forehead. "All batteries ready." "Do it," I ordered. The Resolute shuddered violently as every gun we had fired in unison. Beams of energy and slugs of high explosive ordnance streaked through space, slamming into the Thalorian ship with a force that could crack moons. The sound of the cannons firing reverberated through the ship, deafening, but it was a beautiful noise, the sound of defiance, of survival. On the display, the Thalorian shields flickered under the barrage, buckling and failing. The hull splintered, and explosions rippled across the length of the ship. But even as it burned, even as chunks of debris floated into the void, the core remained intact. The gravity weapon was still charging. "Damn it," I hissed. "They're still holding." The crew was quiet. They were waiting for the next order, but they knew. They could see it too. Another pulse, even more violent than the first, radiated out from the flagship. The Resolute bucked hard, systems flickering. Gravity shifted under my feet, making my stomach lurch. The weapon wasn't just damaging our ship, it was damaging reality itself. "We're losing integrity," Kellen shouted. "Hull breaches on levels 5 through 8. Shields are failing." "Divert everything to the reactor," I said, my voice hard and unrelenting. "We need one more shot, just one." He looked at me, and for the first time in all our battles, I saw hesitation in his eyes. "That'll leave us defenseless," he said, his voice low. I stared back at him, unblinking. "If we don't stop that ship, there won't be anything left to defend." "Commander, the Nexus fleet is sending reinforcements," Thero's voice crackled through the calm. "But they're still 5 minutes out." 5 minutes. An eternity in this kind of battle. "We don't have 5 minutes," I muttered. "Kellen, divert power to the main cannons. Everything. I want every scrap of energy we've got in that final shot." "Aye, sir." I gripped the armrest of my chair, feeling the vibrations of the reactor building to a fever pitch beneath me. The ship groaned in protest, and I could hear the alarms blaring as systems overloaded, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was it. The Thalorian flagship hung in the distance, broken and bleeding but still alive. Still dangerous. I could see the distortions in space around it, reality bending and warping as the weapon grew in power. We had seconds, maybe less. "Kellen," I said quietly, "fire." The world slowed. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The stillness of space, the calm before the storm. And then the Resolute roared to life. The main cannon fired, the energy beam cutting through the void with the force of a dying star. It hit the Thalorian flagship dead center, right at the core where the gravity weapon was housed. There was a moment of resistance, a flash of energy, as the Thalorian ship's shields tried to hold. And then everything exploded. The gravity weapon collapsed in on itself, the ship imploding as the space-time around it ripped apart. For a brief second, I thought we might be caught in the blast, but then the wave of destruction stopped, contained by the very thing it had tried to unleash. I leaned back in my chair, my muscles aching from the tension. The bridge was quiet now, the alarms silenced. We were alive. "We did it," Kellen said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, staring at the wreckage on the display. The Thalorian flagship was gone, reduced to nothing more than debris and dust. The gravity distortions had ceased, and space was returning to normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The Thalorians had crossed a line, delving into forces they barely understood. And though we'd won today, I knew this war was far from over. "Prepare for Nexus rendezvous," I ordered, standing up and adjusting my uniform. "We've still got a galaxy to defend." As the crew went to work, I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction. We'd struck fear into the heart of the Thalorian Empire. And now, they would never forget it. The silence on the bridge was palpable. It was the eerie calm that followed a storm, the kind that makes you wonder if the danger has really passed or if something darker still lingers on the horizon. I stood at the center of it, staring at the flickering display of the wreckage that had once been the Thalorian flagship. A vast, twisted mass of debris floated silently through space, the remnants of the enemy's desperation. The gravity distortions had settled, and for the first time in hours, the space around us was normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I looked at Kellen, who had pulled himself from his seat. His uniform was singed at the edges, and his face was streaked with sweat, but his eyes remained sharp. "We've taken out their weapon, sir. What's left of their fleet is retreating." Retreating. It sounded so final, like a clean victory. But we both knew this war was anything but clean, and I'd been at this long enough to recognize when an enemy's surrender wasn't as simple as it appeared. "Patch me through to the fleet," I said. "I want to speak to Admiral Karos." Kellen nodded, moving to his console as the rest of the crew worked quietly. There was exhaustion in their movements, raw, bone-deep exhaustion that only comes after a battle like this. But even through that exhaustion, there was tension. We had survived, but something was off. As Kellen worked, I glanced at the tactical map again. Our fleet had regrouped, pulling back into defensive formation. But the few remaining Thalorian ships were limping away, their engines flickering weakly. Their escape vector was erratic, and I couldn't help but wonder where were they going. What was their plan? "Sir," Kellen called, "Admiral Karos is on the line." I nodded, stepping toward the comms console. "Admiral," I said, keeping my voice steady, "the Thalorian flagship has been destroyed, but their retreat, it's too easy." Karos' voice crackled through the speakers, sounding weary but still sharp. "I've been thinking the same. Drax, they've never given up this quickly. And with a weapon like that, it doesn't make sense." "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "They risked everything, pushed their technology far beyond anything we've seen before. There's no way they would abandon their plans so easily." Karos was silent for a moment, considering my words. Then, his voice came back, colder now. "What are you suggesting, Commander?" I felt my jaw clench. "I'm suggesting that this might have been a distraction. They knew we'd throw everything at them once they used that weapon. But what if their true objective was never here? What if they've been leading us away from something else?" Kellen looked up from his console, eyes wide. "Commander, if that's true." "We need to move," I said, cutting him off. "We need to find out what their real target is." It took nearly an hour to bring the fleet back into full operational status. Repairs were underway, systems being patched up as best we could, but the sense of urgency had spread like wildfire. Every officer in the Nexus command could feel it, the gnawing uncertainty that we'd missed something crucial. I stood in the Nexus war room, facing the holographic map of the sector, the star systems rotating slowly in front of me. Admiral Karos was there too, along with the heads of several divisions. But no one spoke. They were all waiting for the same thing, for the missing piece to fall into place. Finally, it did. "Commander Drax," a voice crackled through my comms. "We've just received long-range scans from the Outer Rim colonies. There's movement. A large Thalorian fleet is mobilizing near the Galactic expanse." I turned sharply, my heart thudding in my chest. The Galactic expanse, an isolated region of space, barren, uninhabited by sentient life. But it was also a gateway, an ancient sector filled with derelict worlds from forgotten empires. The Thalorians wouldn't just be mobilizing there for no reason. "Get me more intel," I barked. "What's their target? What are they after?" The officer on the other end hesitated for a moment. "Sir, the scans show. It looks like they found something. Deep beneath the surface of one of the derelict worlds. A structure. Massive." A structure. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The Thalorians had been searching for something. Something buried in the ancient ruins of the galaxy. And they'd used their gravity weapon as a distraction, knowing we'd focus all our efforts on stopping it. "Admiral," I said, turning to Karos, "they're after an ancient weapon." Karos' face hardened. If they activate whatever's down there, we're looking at a galaxy-wide catastrophe. The entire war room shifted, the realization sinking in. We had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Thalorians had gambled everything on drawing us away, while they secured the one weapon that could turn the tide of the war once and for all. They won't get a second chance, I said, my voice steely. We move now. Full fleet mobilization. We hit them before they can dig any deeper. The journey to the Galactic expanse was a race against time. The fleet moved at maximum speed, every ship in the Nexus Armada pushing its engines to the brink. But even as we closed the distance, I could feel the weight of what we were walking into. The Thalorians had planned this for a long time, and whatever they'd uncovered on that forgotten world, it wasn't going to be easy to stop. We arrived at the outer edge of the Galactic expanse, the derelict planet looming before us. Massive, scarred from ancient wars, it was a graveyard of forgotten empires, and in the middle of it, the Thalorian fleet hovered like vultures, clustered around the surface. "Commander Drax," Kellen said, his voice tense, "the Thalorians have already started excavation. We're picking up energy readings from deep beneath the surface." I clenched my fists. "They're close." "Order, sir?" Kellen asked. I glanced at the display, at the Thalorian ships forming a defensive perimeter around the planet. They were ready for us. But we had the element of surprise, and this was our only shot. "Prepare for a full assault," I said, turning to the bridge crew. "We're not holding back this time. Hit them with everything we've got." Kellen nodded, his fingers flying across the controls. All systems online. Weapons primed. The rest of the crew was silent, their eyes locked on me. They knew the stakes. They knew this was more than just another battle. This was the endgame. "Tharo," I called over the comms, "coordinate with the rest of the fleet. We're going in hot." "Aye, Commander," he replied. "We're ready." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. This was it. The final arc of this war, the last chance to stop the Thalorians before they unleashed something that could destroy us all. "On my mark," I said, my voice low but steady. The bridge was still. The fleet hung in space, engines humming, weapons armed, waiting for the order. Fire. The Nexus fleet roared to life, a wall of energy and firepower crashing into the Thalorian perimeter. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as our ships unleashed their full might. The Thalorians fought back fiercely, but they were unprepared for the sheer ferocity of our attack. The Resolute led the charge, cutting through the enemy lines like a blade. The ship shuddered under the impact of enemy fire, but we pressed on, pushing deeper into their defenses, closer to the surface of the planet where the real threat lay. "Shields holding at 60%, Kellen reported, his voice strained. "But we're taking heavy fire." "We're almost there," I said, my eyes locked on the tactical display. "Stay on course." The Thalorians were throwing everything they had at us, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. One by one, their ships began to fall, collapsing under the relentless barrage of the Nexus fleet. But even as we broke through their defenses, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The energy readings from the planet were spiking, growing stronger with each passing moment. "Commander," Kellen shouted, "we're picking up massive energy signatures from the surface. It's the structure. They've activated it." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "We need to stop them. Now." The Resolute descended through the atmosphere, engines roaring as we closed in on the surface. Below us, the ancient ruins stretched out like a forgotten graveyard, massive structures rising from the dust, their origins lost to time. But in the center of it all was the Thalorian dig site, and beneath it, something pulsed with unimaginable power. The Resolute shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere of the ancient world. The surface below us stretched out in desolation, broken ruins, and forgotten cities, now little more than decayed skeletons of ancient empires. The Thalorians had carved their way into the heart of this planet, drawn to whatever had been buried here for untold millennia. Whatever it was, they'd activated it. "Commander," Kellen's voice was tight with alarm. The energy readings are spiking off the charts. Whatever they've tapped into, it's not just a weapon. I leaned closer to the display, watching the pulses of energy rising from the Thalorian excavation site. They weren't just unearthing some old relic, they'd woken something up, and it was growing stronger by the second. "Prepare for ground assault," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos that was boiling inside me. "We can't let them finish whatever they've started." The ground below us was crawling with Thalorian forces, their ships forming a tight perimeter around the dig site. But their defensive posture told me one thing: they weren't waiting for us to attack. They were stalling. "Drax, we're picking up tremors from the planet's core," Kellen said, his voice tense. "The whole structure, it's alive." I blinked. Alive. The pieces clicked together, cold dread flooding my mind. The Thalorians hadn't just uncovered a weapon, they'd awakened something sentient, and it was feeding on the planet itself, growing more powerful as it consumed the energy around it. "Get us as close to the site as possible," I ordered. "We need to shut this down before it reaches full power." The landing bay of the Resolute was a flurry of activity as the assault teams prepared for deployment. We were going in heavy, every able-bodied soldier armed to the teeth, ready to take on whatever the Thalorians had guarding the site. My personal squad, led by Captain Thero, was already assembled. Thero was a rock calm under pressure, focused on the mission. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable beneath the armored visor. "Ready to move, Commander." I gave a tight nod. "We don't have much time. If that thing reaches full activation, it could wipe out more than just this planet." Thero didn't flinch. He knew the stakes as well as I did. As we made our final checks, I glanced toward the rest of the assault teams, each squad leader nodding in grim understanding. There was no turning back from this. Once we hit the ground, it would be a race against time. The dropships lifted off from the Resolute's hangar, slicing through the turbulent atmosphere like blades. The ancient ruins grew larger beneath us, looming like tombstones over a graveyard of forgotten civilizations. "Stay sharp," I said into my comms. "We don't know what we're dealing with down there." The ground shook as our dropship touched down near the outskirts of the excavation site. I could feel the tremors through my boots deep, rumbling vibrations that told me whatever was happening beneath the surface was intensifying. The air was thick with tension as we disembarked, our boots hitting the cracked, barren earth. The Thalorians had already dug deep into the planet's crust, their excavation machines churning endlessly in the distance, surrounded by a horde of their soldiers. "They're waiting for us," Thero muttered, his eyes scanning the horizon. But why? I had the same thought. The Thalorians were stalling, keeping us occupied while their real objective ticked away beneath the surface. But what exactly had they uncovered? "Let's not keep them waiting," I said, gripping my rifle tighter. The Thalorian forces met us head-on as we advanced toward the dig site, their weapons blazing in the dim light of the alien sun. Our squads moved with precision, cutting through their lines with brutal efficiency. Plasma fire filled the air, the crack of energy weapons mingling with the screams of the dying. But even as we pushed them back, I could feel the ground beneath us becoming increasingly unstable. The tremors were growing more violent, shaking the very foundation of the planet. We had to reach the core before it was too late. "Drax, we've breached the outer perimeter," Thero's voice came through the comms. "But they're defending something at the center of the site." I pushed forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. The Thalorians were converging on a central structure massive, ancient, and pulsing with energy. It looked like a temple, its walls etched with symbols that none of us could decipher. But the energy radiating from it was unmistakable. "This is it," I said, my voice low. "Whatever they've found, it's in there." We moved as one, cutting down the remaining Thalorians as we made our way toward the entrance of the temple. The closer we got, the more intense the tremors became, the ground beneath us cracking and splintering. And then, as we reached the threshold, I saw a vast chamber, deep beneath the surface, illuminated by a pulsating energy source. In the center of it all stood the Thalorian High Commander, his back to us as he manipulated a series of controls on a console. He didn't even turn to face us when we entered. "You're too late," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It's already begun." I raised my weapon, taking aim at his head. "Shut it down." The High Commander laughed, a hollow, empty sound. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't a weapon. It's a god." My heart skipped a beat. "What?" The Thalorian turned slowly, his eyes glowing with a strange, unnatural light. "We didn't awaken a machine. We awakened a being, an ancient intelligence that once ruled over the stars, and now it's hungry." I glanced at the pulsing energy source at the center of the room. It was alive, sentient, feeding on the planet's core, growing stronger with every passing second. "Shut it down, now," I shouted, but the High Commander only smiled. "You can't stop it," he said. "No one can." Without hesitation, I fired. The Thalorian's body crumpled to the floor, but his words echoed in my mind. "No one can." The moment the High Commander fell, the entire structure began to quake violently. The energy readings spiked, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that we were out of time. "Drax, we need to pull out." Thero's voice came through the comms, frantic. "This whole place is coming down." I looked at the pulsing core, the ancient intelligence feeding on the planet's energy. If we didn't stop it here, it would consume everything. "There has to be a way to overload it," I said, moving toward the console where the High Commander had been working. "Something we can use to reverse the process." "Commander," Kellen's voice came through the comms. "I'm detecting an energy surge. If you don't get out now, the entire planet is going to implode." I ignored him, my fingers flying across the controls. There had to be a way, some way to stop this thing before it destroyed everything. And then I found it. A failsafe buried deep within the ancient system. It wasn't designed to destroy the intelligence, but to contain it, to trap it within the planet's core. But activating it would require a massive energy surge, one that would destroy the entire planet in the process. "Thero," I said, my voice calm despite the chaos around me. "Get everyone back to the ships. Now." "What about you, sir?" Thero asked. "I'll be right behind you," I lied. "Just go." Thero hesitated for a moment, but he knew better than to argue. "Yes, sir." As the rest of the team pulled back, I focused on the controls, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the only way. I had to stop it here, even if it meant sacrificing the entire planet. I activated the failsafe. The ground beneath me rumbled violently, and I felt the heat rising as the core began to collapse. The ancient intelligence screamed a sound that echoed through my mind, a sound of pure rage. And then everything went white. When I opened my eyes, I was floating in the void. The planet was gone, reduced to nothing but dust and debris. The Nexus fleet hovered in the distance, their lights flickering against the backdrop of empty space. I was still alive. Somehow. "Drax?" Kellen's voice came through the comms, shaky but relieved. "You made it." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "What's the status?" "The Thalorian fleet has been destroyed," Kellen said. "And the core, it's gone." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. It was over. We had stopped the Thalorians, stopped the ancient intelligence from awakening fully. But at what cost? I drifted in silence for a moment longer before speaking. "Bring me home." As the Resolute moved toward me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this war was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and there, lurking in its depths, there would always be more secrets, more threats waiting to be uncovered. But for now, we had won. Back aboard the Resolute, the atmosphere was a mix of exhaustion and quiet relief. The crew worked in near silence, their faces showing the toll of the battle we had just survived. I stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars. The planet was gone, nothing remained but the faintest traces of dust, a testament to the power we had narrowly contained. "Commander," Kellen's voice brought me out of my thoughts. He stood at attention beside me, though the usual stiffness in his posture was absent, replaced with a weariness that I understood all too well. "We've received a message from the Nexus Council," he said. "They're requesting a debrief on the Thalorian threat and what was uncovered." I nodded, unsurprised. They would want answers, explanations. But how could I explain what we had faced? How could I make them understand the magnitude of the threat, the intelligence we had nearly unleashed on the galaxy? "Send the report," I said finally, my voice rougher than I intended. "They'll get their answers." Kellen hesitated for a moment. "And what about the core? Should we tell them everything?" I met his gaze, and for a moment, the weight of that decision hung between us. The Council didn't need to know every detail, especially not about the failsafe or the fact that there might be other ancient intelligences buried across the galaxy. But hiding the truth could be just as dangerous. "We'll tell them what they need to know," I said quietly. "Nothing more." Kellen gave a curt nod, understanding the unspoken meaning behind my words. The full truth would remain with those of us who had been there, who had seen the darkness that lay beneath the surface. Later, in the quiet of my quarters, I stared at the data files scattered across the console. Reports, after-action summaries, tactical analysis. There was nothing that could capture the sheer scale of what we had faced. But one report, flagged as high priority, caught my eye. It was from an intelligence officer in the Nexus fleet, classified, encrypted. As I opened it, the familiar face of Admiral Varen appeared on the screen. He was an old ally, someone who had fought alongside me in more than one war. "Commander Drax," Varen began, his voice low, "I don't have to tell you that what you uncovered on that planet is far bigger than anything we've seen before. The Council is going to try and downplay it, minimize the threat. But there are rumors of other excavations. The Thalorians weren't working alone." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you saying, Admiral?" Varen's gaze hardened. "I'm saying that the war with the Thalorians was just the beginning. There are other factions, other powers that know about these ancient intelligences. They've been searching for them, waiting for the right time to awaken them." "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What could they possibly gain?" "Control," Varen said grimly. "If they can harness the power of these beings, they won't just rule the galaxy, they'll reshape it, and not for the better." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of his words settling over me like a lead blanket. The threat we had faced on that planet wasn't an isolated incident. There were others who were willing to risk everything to control the unimaginable power of these ancient intelligences. "What do we do?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Varen's expression didn't waver. "We fight. We find these factions, stop them before they can awaken anything else. But we can't do it alone. We're going to need allies, stronger ones than we've ever had before." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. The Nexus Council would never approve of what Varen was suggesting. They would want to keep this quiet, maintain order. But order wasn't going to save us from what was coming. "We'll need to operate outside of the usual channels," I said, my voice firm. "Covertly, we can't afford to wait for the Council to catch up." Varen's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "That's why I'm counting on you, Drax. You've never been one to follow the rules when the stakes are this high." I smirked despite the gravity of the situation. "No, I haven't." As the transmission ended, I felt the weight of the galaxy's future pressing down on me. The battle we had just fought had been won, but the war was far from over. There were greater forces at play, ancient powers stirring in the darkness. But we wouldn't face them alone. It wasn't long before Varen's warnings became reality. Intelligence reports began trickling in, each more troubling than the last. Strange energy signatures detected on distant worlds, reports of clandestine Thalorian factions regrouping, and whispers of other species searching for the remnants of ancient civilizations. We couldn't wait. The Resolute would need to be ready for what was coming, and so would I. As I stood on the bridge, looking out at the vast expanse of space, I felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over me. There were still battles to be fought, wars to be won. "Kellen," I called out, turning toward him as he monitored the systems. "Prepare the crew. We're leaving as soon as the ship is fully repaired." Another mission already, Commander, Kellen asked, though his voice held no surprise. I nodded. We've got work to do. As the crew moved to carry out my orders, I couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. The galaxy was full of secrets, some better left buried, but if the Thalorians and their allies wanted to dig them up, then we would be there to stop them. Because that's what we did. We fought, we survived, and we protected the galaxy no matter the cost. The stars stretched out before us, endless and unforgiving. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready. In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, deep in the heart of a forgotten system, something stirred. Buried beneath miles of rock and dust, an ancient power pulsed with renewed life, its consciousness slowly awakening from a millennia-long slumber. It had been called by many names across countless ages, but now it was simply aware. And it was hungry. As the first tremors rippled through the planet's core, the intelligence spread its awareness outward, seeking, searching. It would not remain trapped here forever. There were others out there, others like it, others that would rise in time. And when they did, the galaxy would tremble. But for now, it waited, silent, patient. And so, the cycle began again.